given the time, maybe let's get started.
Okay.
Okay. Today, we're very happy to kick off our VQMS in the fall installment. And we're so happy to have Anita Rao joining us today to talk about the paper animal welfare labels and consumer demand. I'm happy that people are making the way into our new link for this new semester. So just a reminder of the format. We're going to go for about a little bit less than an hour for the official talk. And then if people are interested, we have like a more informal session towards the end to talk about kind of more informal feedback with Anita. For the panelists, you can feel free to unmute and ask questions during the talk, like in regular seminars. For attendees, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll monitor and relay the questions to Anita. And she'll also kind of stop during the talk for questions. With that, Anita, please take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Zenling. And thanks to all the VQMS organizers for having me here. And thanks to all the people on the webinar. This is a working paper with Marco from KU Leuven and Max from Tilburg. They're both there as panelists on the call. This paper is a working paper, so feel free to chime in with your questions or put in the chat and interrupt anytime. So that's kind of the intent of this talk, and I hope we get a lot of feedback. So don't hesitate. I will have 3 pauses that I have internalized, and I will pause. But in case I don't pause, just chime in. So this paper is on understanding whether animal welfare labels, as it pertains to food products, so specifically meat, whether it has an effect on consumer demand. And the motivation for this work really comes from this idea that animal welfare is an increasingly discussed topic. A lot of consumers want to know where their meat is coming from. So again, these are meat products. So this is not about thinking, should I be a vegetarian or a vegan or not? This is not addressing that problem. This is conditional on you being a meat eater. Do you care about animal welfare? And there's a substantial voice out there that does want to know more about how their animals are treated before they consume that meat. And more governments, more so in Europe, but also increasingly in the US, are giving this a lot of thought. And that's kind of some backdrop as to why this is where our motivation comes from. So given this, we have 3 sets of research questions that I want to quickly jump into. So the first one is, do consumers care about animal welfare? And really, if consumers know, if you give them this information, does it change what they buy? That's kind of our fundamental first main substantive question. Now, you might say that in the news, this is a hotly debated topic, so clearly they care. So it's one thing to say that you care about something, and it's another to part with your money and say that you're going to buy something where you know that animals have been treated well, right? So that's kind of where empirically we want to answer this question. The second question, and so this is to give you quick context as to what we are specifically looking at, and I'll spend more time in detail about what we're talking about. But on these 2, I think these are minced meat products, you see these labels. The first box has this 1 highlighted, and the second box has this number 4 highlighted. And they are talking about the level of animal welfare. So level 1 is kind of the minimum legal requirement of how animals should be treated. And level 4 is the highest standard so that's the introduction of this label is what we will be specifically studying in our context to answer a broader question about, do consumers change their behavior? The second question, which is also ongoing work, is we want to understand whether there's a different impact when, say, one store or one retailer or one chain adopts such a label, as opposed to the entire sector, meaning the entire, in our case, we'll see the entire country adopting it. Is there a differential impact? And the research currently out there hasn't reached a uniform verdict on what is required. So we can test this in our setting. And lastly, we want to understand what kind of consumer is impacted the most. Okay, so those are kind of broadly our 3 research questions, which we'll try and get to with our data. So just in terms of—
Anita,
yes.
sorry, just a quick question. Are you going to be able to disentangle the animal welfare from the other things that might be tied up in it? So one example that I'm thinking is, the way that the animals are treated might affect me as well as the consumer. So if, for instance, they're given antibiotics, maybe I care about that more than the actual animal welfare. And it doesn't matter, I guess, in this context as well.
Yeah, so that's a good question, right? So what you're saying is the animal welfare condition itself might affect the quality of the product, and therefore that nutritionally matters to me. So I think there's an element of that. And so, it's a good segue to our next slide, which talks about nutrition. And let me get to this, and hopefully it answers your question in two slides, Christina. So, right. So I think, one of the challenges in this is there is no standardized animal welfare labeling in most countries. So why hasn't this question been empirically studied? In most countries, this is still, there is no standard. There's a demand for it. Policymakers are thinking about it, but there is no standard. In fact, this has led to a lot of problems where there are these unsubstantiated claims with words like thoughtfully raised, which, personally, I don't know what it means to thoughtfully raise cattle or pigs before they're slaughtered, but those are words that are present on products, or humanely raised, ethically raised, etc. And although they're unsubstantiated, they're not false. Technically, they're legally allowed to say this because really there is no legal definition of this. So firms are totally fine going around saying this. And in fact, the Animal Welfare Institute in the US warns against being humane washed by such labels, precisely because there's no standard label in most countries. And that's been part of the empirical challenge, is we can't really study this if there is no standard label. And the second is most of the papers, therefore, have looked at survey measures or stated preference measures of animal welfare. And usually, as marketers, typically we embrace such techniques, especially when there is no observational data, and that's fine. But in our setting, this can be problematic because this is a socially desirable outcome. And so most people will tend to overstate what they feel like. And we think this is much more exacerbated in the animal welfare setting, more so in other settings that marketers have turned to. So that's kind of just broadly why we think there's not much empirical work in this area. So now getting a little bit to Christina's question before, where does this paper lie? And so there's a huge literature about information disclosure, both in marketing and economics. And we know that information, when you provide it to consumers, typically consumers will respond to it. That's been documented again and again. Most of the work in marketing has looked at nutrition labels, things like heart health, I guess traffic signals, healthy or not, those kinds of typically mandated or even voluntary labels. And our paper is going to look at things that we think are fairly orthogonal to nutritional information. And I guess the key here is fairly, but also that it's orthogonal. So this doesn't impact you directly. So in the setting that we study, my understanding is 3 things change as you increase your level of animal welfare. It's mostly the amount of space you have, the amount of sunlight or outdoor access that you have, and whether you can play with things. Okay, so those are typically the differences. My sense is whether you're given antibiotics or not is not a part of the changes. I think eventually this can be the case down, but in our setting, that's not. But so therefore, I think it's fair to say this doesn't directly impact my health or nutrition, but consumers might interpret it that way, right? They can say, look at a higher animal welfare and say, oh, that's probably similar to organic or something, and therefore I think it's healthy. So that's where we're at. But good question. The second space where this paper lies is, again, there's a lot of literature on sustainability. And most of it has looked at environmental sustainability. So think of, the green eco labels or, being more green or green certified. So there are a lot of papers along those lines. And there's, at least to our knowledge, there's very little stuff on animal welfare specifically. And in fact, the 2019 UN global report looking forward to 2030 has essentially said that animal welfare is a key missing issue, not just in terms of governments and policymakers not paying close attention to it, but also not much research on that. So that's, I think this is something which we could use a good answer to, but also I think other countries are looking for answers to. So just thinking of this as one dimension of sustainability where we currently don't know much about. So that's kind of just broadly speaking where we fit. So coming back to our empirical setting, and I'll talk a little bit about our setting and the data, and then I'll pause for any questions up until this far. But also feel free to jump in. Actually, this might be a good time in case any other questions are.
One quick question, Anita.
Yes.
You might touch on later on, but I also kind of read your paper a little bit. This is the voluntary adoption by retailers, and I kind of wonder what is the reaction from the farmers or manufacturers, right? Because it could be that if a retailer going to adopt this label, I'm one, right? I'm not not a manufacturer that produce like a for organic meat, but like kind of
Right.
okay, right? Would I want to pull myself out of that retailer, and would that have impact on the demand in the sense that maybe that's only 4 or 3 that might want to stay instead of one? It's like
Yeah,
it's
that's a good
from the supply
question.
or demand, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what your concern is that if I am, say, a level 1 or the lowest level producer, and now this is being mandated on me in some sense,
Right.
although it's not a mandate, I'm
Right.
required to showcase this, I might not be too happy and either pull my products off or just now switch to making it a level 4 product. And that's absolutely possible. And in our setting, one of the good things for our research, but bad things, I think, just in terms of consumers, is because these things take time. Like to become level 4, you have to, invest in, cattle, what you're feeding them, and not what you're feeding them, but what you're doing in your farm, like giving them more space, giving them more access to outdoors, and changing how your doors or cages are. Those are longer term changes. And in the short term, to the extent we could look at, the assortment didn't change. And this was one of the criticisms as well, as to, really what you have on the shelf is the same. Nothing changed. So from a research standpoint, that's nice, because from that, at least on that angle, the assortment did not change in the short run. But you're absolutely right. In the long run, I think after a couple of years, in fact, I think we found some documents that said there is a shift towards more level 3s and level 4s now than before. But yes, in our setting, that hasn't changed.
Okay,
much.
so you know that it doesn't change. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good question. Yeah, so this is a voluntary introduction, as Anocha already preempted. In fact, this was something that the government was planning to mandate with a voluntary participation, but it ends up being a voluntary adoption, and I'll go into more detail of this, but broadly, these were the labels that were introduced into the marketplace by most of the retailers, the big retailers in Germany, I think covering 80% of the market. And so level 1, lowest level, level 4 is the highest level. Here is a timeline just to give you a sense of why this happened and how these changes happened, and things that we'll take advantage of. So in 2018, a new political party was formed, and they essentially said, let's actually have a government certified animal welfare label with participation from retailers being voluntary. That was the goal for 2 years down the road. In a month, however, one of the biggest retail chains in Germany, Lidl, started their own voluntary label. So the one that you see here, April 2018. So it also has 4 levels, 1, 2, 3, 4. The shape is slightly different, but essentially is the same 4 levels. And they did this largely thinking, hey, the government is going to make us do this anyway. In 2 years' time, let's do this right now. And what this ended up doing is it preempted a lot of other chains, chains like Aldi, etc., to start adopting their own retail labels. So this is, again, all these chains are putting these labels on their meat products. That's what is happening in what we call the transition phase, which is largely 2018. Again, so there was criticism towards the end of 2018 saying, look, there are all these different labels. We understand the retailers are doing this to provide information, but it's just causing too much confusion. And so in April 2019, there was all these retailers got together and adopted this uniform label, which is what I showed you earlier, the square 1, 2, 3, 4 format. And so all retailers adopt this by April 2019. And so we'll look at what happens in this, what we call the uniform label phase, where all retailers have the standard label. We'll also talk a little bit about the transition phase, because I think there's some interesting things that it lets us identify. But because of all this, by 2021, the government essentially abandoned plans of requiring this as a government mandated, because the point was what we tried to do, the retailers already did it. So there's no point in us, making this a mandate. It already exists in the marketplace. It's great for us, right? So that's just a history of what happened. Now, in terms of how this change looks to the consumer going into a shop, this is a minced meat product. There are two minced meat products here. The one on the left, before the label was introduced, would look exactly like this, but without the square thing highlighted in red. After April 2019, this level 1 label has been slapped onto it. The one on the right, same idea. Before, this says bio on it, and that will become relevant once I tell you how we identify level 1 and level 4. The one on the right, minced meat product, before 2018 did not have this thing saying level 4. After April 2019, it gets a level 4 label, right? So the SKU, if you will, stays the same. Everything else stays the same. Now there's a new label put in there. So that's the big difference as of April 2019. The data that we get to answer our 3 research questions comes from GfK. So for those of you familiar with Nielsen, it's very Nielsen-like in its nature. This is specific to Germany, and we also collect for another country, which is going to be our control. And it's household level panel data across all categories. And we have data spanning the no label phase, this transition phase, and the uniform labels phase, so 2017 to 2019. So essentially, we have, when there is no label, we have 15 months of data for that. The transition phase, by definition, is 12 months. We have data on that. And then after the uniform label was adopted, we have 9 months of data for that. So that's just a span of our data. What does the data have? It has where did the household purchase, what price did they purchase the product at, what size of meat did they buy in most of the German retail chains. Important note here is these are all private labels. There are no national brands. So this is, if Lidl is putting a label, it's for Lidl's product. So most of these are private labels, which makes things easier in some sense, but also these are going to be chain-specific products. Now, 2 important things for identifying
Anita?
levels. Yes.
Sorry, there are some questions which I think are related to the previous things you're talking about.
Okay.
So we have two people asking questions that I think are very similar. I think it's related to Christina's earlier point. If the animals are treated better, we expect a different quality. Like the meat may taste better. The eggs, we know that the chickens are free ranging, then the eggs will actually look different. So like I think one I guess quote unquote concern is our quality is different. And the related point Brian point out is that if there are additional benefits that the supply side knows, are they also trying to market that in addition to the labels? So there's a difference in labels, but are they also doing other things to talk about these additional benefits?
Right. So I think the first question absolutely is on the quality of it, right? So we can't observe what a consumer is thinking. They might have a belief that this is indeed better quality. And in fact, when I show you how we identify the levels, you will see that actually quality they should not think differently about quality, but it is possible, right? So that is definitely possible, and we can't rule that out. So it's not just about welfare, but what you're saying is it's about maybe the taste is better or worse if it's a level 1, and technically what we are measuring is going to be a summation of that. The second one, what are, so I don't know whether the question is about retailers doing something or manufacturers themselves doing something to promote their product. That's definitely possible. In fact, the uniform label overall, I'll show you this graph later, but did get a lot of awareness. So compared to the store-specific labels, right? So they were much more aware. So this is more in terms of Google Trends. You see much more awareness about it. Now, what is that awareness of? Are they saying, hey, our this level 4 meat is more tastier? So it's unlikely this would be promoted by the retailer, because the retailer is selling both level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. So they're selling everything. So, but it's possible that level 4 is where they might be making more, margin. So they might push that. So it's possible. I don't know whether I don't think we have any information about any retailer doing this disproportionately for their level 4 to level 1. Overall, there is news about this entire campaign as a whole, as opposed to pushing one relative to the other. But that's a good check that we can definitely do.
Do you have any variation, like, since you have levels 1 through 4, can you use the variation from the levels to try to disentangle the difference between like animal welfare and like what the taste might be? Like, if it's really all about how you treat the animal in level 2 versus like some other inputs, like the kind of thing that it's being fed in level 4, like, does that give you anything in teasing out the effect of animal welfare versus, something?
Yeah, so that's a good suggestion. So we, for this paper, will be looking specifically only at level 1 and level 4, and I'll just go and tell you why. So we can't use that variation between 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. I think eventually, once that happens in the marketplace, I think that's a great idea to see whether to disentangle quality compared to just pure, I guess altruism of some sort, right? I think that will be a good way to do that. But let me get to what exactly we can do with the data we have. So the data themselves don't identify labels, right? So this is just a challenge in the entire, I think, labeling literature. You have to go collect it yourself, or you have to, have another company that does this. Typically, household level data don't have labels. So how do we infer this? So the first point is our data tells us whether it's organic or not, and it also tells us the type of meat. So we're going to use both of these to identify the levels of animal welfare. Now, the first is, because we know whether a meat is organic or not, we can essentially, so all organic meat by definition is level 4. So that lets us tie level 4 to organic meat. So in some sense, the quality information for organic meat is already there. So if you knew beforehand that organic meat has all these benefits, they're supposed to treat animals in such and such a manner. If you knew that organic meat tastes better, like the cage-free example someone had brought up earlier, then you had all this information. Adding that level 4 label should not make a change to your decision. So that's just, really level 4 and organic, they're indistinguishable. But where that change happens is level 1. Now, how do we identify level 1? So we got some supplementary data from, this is really a survey that is done by the German Consumer Protection Office. I'm not going to try and pronounce what it's actually called in Germany, so that's why it's there for those of you interested. So essentially, they ran surveys where they go to each of these retailers and they ask them, among your SKUs, what is level 1, what is level 2, 3, and 4? And what you see is that level 4, so these are by types of meat, and they distinct. So this was done in 2019 and 2020, which is relevant for our period. There are two things to note here. So one is level 4, almost, so there's pork, beef, mixed, and poultry. So the red is pork, the blue is beef, the green is poultry, and yellow is mixed in these charts. Now, poultry doesn't have level 1. Pork, beef, and mixed have level 1. And so we're essentially going to say that anything that is pork, beef, and mixed is largely going to be level 1. Most of poultry falls under level 2. Okay, so you see this green bar, they're largely in 2, 3, and some of it is in 4, right? So therefore, what we do is, in the category we study, poultry is not going to be a big part, but we also throw away, delete all of poultry. And so to a large extent, we're looking at level 1 versus level 4. And you can say, look, there's some tiny red bars there, so it could be that some of them are level 2 and level 3. So to some extent, think of this as level 4 relative to anything below level 4 if you want to be exact or precise, but largely this is level 4 versus level 1. So going back to that quality comment before, I might not have known that this non-organic meat, for example, was a level 1 meat. I might have thought this is close to organic. So there might be some kind of quality information embedded in. So it's possible that people might think that, hey, now this is for sure the lowest animal welfare. So I might just leave that product, right? So that's definitely possible. Okay. Any other questions on this so far? Let me pause again.
Yeah, so I need just one, I think, more clarification question. So you do see the labels that little, so that the retailers put on the products, right? And those labels you do or you do not?
We do not. We infer it. We infer.
But why don't you see them?
So the data doesn't record it. So
but you could go to the store and a team of RAs could go to the store and capture that, no?
Now, if we do it now, it would be different than 2020. So I think that was our hesitation. But yes, if we had started this project in 2020, then yes, we could have gotten that information.
Okay. So all right. So
but yes, so that's going to be a limitation.
Yeah, so I understand now, but potentially you could use as robustness check of your classification this check in the market right now that there should be a large overlap between what you see now and what you identified.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think we did look at some like online images where they're recorded SKUs, and I think we didn't do like 100% check, but I think there are some checks where they largely follow our classification. But yeah, that's a good suggestion that definitely we can look at.
And just since I'm still open, so here at the microphone. So the second one is potentially some of these products have nutrition labels. And so to think about the quality that Christina mentioned, the separation between quality and welfare, I think what you would like to see is that distinction or that gap that might exist between the nutrition and potentially what you're inferring as level 1 or level 4, right? Because if all the information is on nutrition, then it's not about welfare, it's about the quality or the nutrition of the product. So I think you need to have some kind of additional variation that should pick up what the welfare concerns would be, I think.
Right. So, but the nutrition itself is not changing. So that information is constant, right? So the calories or the quality is not changing.
But it's basically what I'm saying is that, let's say that you also have a nutrition label that's 1 through 4, right? Right now you have an additional label or instead of 1 through 4, that's welfare. If the two overlap,
right,
you cannot say that it's welfare or nutrition. If the two do not overlap,
right,
it's that gap that should be welfare. That's what I'm arguing. Any effect on the sales or whatever it is that you mentioned would be because of welfare, not because of nutrition label or quality of the products.
So in some sense, right, so our level 4 being organic by definition gets at least to level 4, the quality, there should not be any additional quality weight given to it. So whatever is happening to level 4 is driven by animal welfare. But yes, you're right, level 1 there can be that, right? So yes, I think that's worth thinking about, like what kinds of quality or maybe even a supplementary data set that can get to consumers' beliefs about what they think. And I think we talked a little bit about understanding what consumers think when they see these labels, right? Are they thinking animal welfare or are they thinking high quality? But that's fair. I think that's a good comment. Great.
Anita,
yes.
Can I quickly ask at this stage, like two, maybe one is follow-up, one is a general kind of setting questions. So one is on the supply side. In the paper, you say that these guys didn't change prices when these labels came in, which was somewhat surprising, I felt like. Do you have an idea why they will know, like, this is a private label product, it should be easy for them to change prices. So do you know why didn't they? And the second question, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the second question about general, should we interpret this as label being added, or there is a big campaign, there is big discussion in Germany about this label, so part of the effect is just awareness and people paying more attention? Just how should we think about this?
Yeah, so to your second question, I think we think of this as a net effect, because there is definitely a campaign and we can't separate the label from the campaign. So we think of this as a policy change, and this policy caused people to shift. I think that's how we think of it. Yeah, minus the campaign, minus awareness, whether the label would have an effect, you would need to remove all of that, and we can't, right, in this non-experimental setting. So think of this as a net policy change. Prices at the aggregate level, when we look at it, it doesn't change. But what we do is, maybe there are individual retail specific changes, and you're right that you would expect that they would increase prices. We control for it in our, a more discrete choice structural model where we control for prices in there. And so whatever we recover there is going to be net of prices, if that makes sense. So yes, it's possible that retailers might have changed prices.
Got it. Thanks. Yeah, I didn't see the second part. You mentioned that some retailers might do change them. So okay, thanks.
Yeah, it might be an appendix right now, but I think the plan is to bring that up front. But yes, good question. Yeah, so here, so meat is a very broad category. So we want to look at a category where we can have sufficient N so that we have statistical power. So sufficient demand for the product exists. And also we have sufficient products with level 4, because that's our main research question, whether people move to level 4 or away from level 4, what's happening. So just in terms of choice set, we need to have an assortment. So those are our two constraints going into the data. So I'm going to show you a set of summary statistics now. The first one is organized by type of meat in across different meat products. So the data tells us what kind of meat there is, especially in Germany, which is nice. And if you look at, so this is sorted by the demand for it. Minced meat is the one with the highest demand, both in terms of market share, just in terms of volume. This is across 2 years of data, but also in terms of penetration, which is defined as a household buys it at least once, right? So it's a pretty popular product compared to others where, people are not buying it as much. So there's sufficient people buying this. And it's also, I think, something which is very popular and easy to cook. So that's another reason why it's used so much. The second thing is in the assortment itself. So what I'm going to show you next is, again, a bunch of summary statistics, but this tells you a little bit about assortment and prices. So across all meat, we have about 1.6% of SKUs are level 4. But if you look at minced meat, we have a more sizable portion, which is level 4 already. So about 10% of SKUs are level 4, which tells us that there's a sizable, there's sufficient assortment there so people can substitute. So if there is no level 4, for example, then we can't really answer our research question, which is substitution to level 4 products, right? So that's just to motivate why we pick minced meat across all different minced meat categories. So given that, yes.
Just one quick question. So do you find these percentage to vary across retailers? Because some retailers might have, are these computed across all retailers?
This data is across all retailers, across all time.
Yeah, it might be different, it's variation, right? Like some retailer might carry more organic meat, like if you're an organic retailer.
Right. Yeah, so it's possible. Did you have is your
question? So I kind of wonder if that's, I know that if that has some, kind of changed the way people like if you go to shop in particular store and you see higher percentage versus low percentage, it's it's more visible, right? If the more of the product have these label in an organic store, it catch your eyes more, catch your attention more if like, you know, it's only 1% of organic stuff in a store that is not organic based. And I don't know if that awareness play a role, like attention play a role here.
I see. So what you're saying is like if I go to a Whole Foods type of retailer, then I see more level 4 all of a sudden, and that might so it's kind of like the intensity of treatment is higher in those
In some,
Yeah, so I don't know off the top of my head. I'm sure there is variation. I don't know, Marco, Max, do you know if there is any such variation across retailers?
The point is, if I can add, it's the one category which is closest across all, or is most similar across all retailers. If you think about like special meat types, then you find, for example, like a really rump steak, you might find it just like in full line supermarkets and not in discounters. But minced meat you find also across also at discounters, and also the organic minced meat. So this is also the category which is the closest across all retailers. So minced meat.
But even level 4, like level 4 is also similar. But I think
at least you have one. It could be that you don't have all varieties on all package sizes, right? But I think it's a good robustness check that we look at that and see whether there's variation in the number of the assortment, right? So, but at least they have one organic minced meat products, every retailer.
Right. So I think we definitely control for these in our like similar to the price question from Andre, but I think it's a nice check to see, and that variation might be useful, in fact, to look at the intensity of treatment there as well. If you know one retailer has 8% level 4 and the other has 1%, I think that's good. Yeah.
I thought that's kind of interesting. It's kind of more like heterogeneous effect in some ways, like across people who shop across different retail stores.
Yeah.
So yeah, just a thought.
That's cool. But I think most of these retailers are like, I don't know, like discounters is my sense. I think they're very similar. But yes, it's worth checking for sure. Okay. So you know, just since we spent a lot of time on the data and what it can do and what it can't do, just bringing back what we're trying to do here. So in some sense, we want to understand, does the label does it affect overall consumption, right? So I see the label now and I realize things about animal welfare, and I might just stop consuming meat. So that's one possibility. I might also shift from level 1 to level 4, or it might not have any impact if, you know, I don't care about this, or if I'm not aware about these, right? So first we do a difference in difference analysis to look at what is happening to shares of products as well as overall consumption. And then we quantify this change to understand willingness to pay for this label using a discrete choice demand model. So that's kind of coming back to our goal. But let me pause in case there are any questions on the chat or any other questions at this point. I can't see the chat windows for some reason, but
there was a question before, but Marco addressed it in the chat, so I think you can continue.
Okay. My efficient co-authors. Okay. So the first thing in terms of our difference in difference analysis is we are going to look at all of this relative to a neighboring country. So we're going to look at Germany relative to Belgium, which is neighboring. It's in Europe. It's so it's going to share similar characteristics. And when I show you some of the patterns, you'll see that meat consumption looks very similar in Belgium compared to Germany. So it serves as a really nice control group. We also looked at some other neighboring countries, but data is not as nice. It's not nicely collected for a few. And one of the countries, I think Amsterdam, already has some kind of a private label, or not private label, but it has like a selective label where a few retailers or few products use it. It's not at the sector-wide level like in Germany. So we want to stay away from Amsterdam, which has, I think, the better label in there. So we use Belgium as our control for this exercise. So what should we expect going in, right? So the first question was, do consumers care about animal welfare? In general, we could see a positive effect where there is demand for these better products, both quality and label. There could be no effect because there is no influence. People might not care about these aspects, or people are just not aware of this, right? So this information overload to some extent. There's so much information. Should I really pay attention to every label on the product? So, and there have been papers that have shown that there can be sometimes no effect of labels. Or it could be a negative effect where, given the articles on greenwashing and humane washing, it could just be skepticism as to what is this firm or retailer trying to do. It could be confusion, so people just leave the category as a whole. So there could be negative effects as well of the label. And some work in, I think, the behavioral literature has found negative effects of not animal welfare, but just, I think, sustainability labels overall. And then our second question, which is, do kind of store-specific labels work as well as sector-specific labels? On one hand, there's work that shows that yes, if one store, this is more in the nutrition domain, if one store adopts a label, that it's sufficient to influence demand. But on the other hand, it's also, there's work that has shown that it might not be, because there's just not sufficient awareness given to that from that particular store, right? So again, this is an open question that we hope to address. So that's just empirical predictions before I show you the results. So the first one, this is just raw data looking at, so the x-axis is time. So think of each point as a quarter in a given year. And the y-axis is the level 4 market share. The left one is Germany. The blue line shows you Germany, and the orange line is for Belgium, and the scale for that is on the right y-axis. So for this particular graph, we take each household's share of minced meat, so level 4 minced meat, as a function, the denominator is all minced meat, and then aggregate it to the quarterly level, and that's what is being plotted here. Roughly, there seems to be an increase in share of level 4 products relative to total minced meat consumed, compared to the orange line, which is Belgium, which looks fairly flat. The two dashed lines here, the first dashed line is when Lidl adopted its own retail-specific label, and the second dashed line is when this uniform label became adopted in all of Germany. So that's where you see this big bump here. And we're going to examine in detail what is, if there is some effect of the transition phase as well. And if then next I'll show you the overall minced meat consumption. They look very similar. Again, blue is Germany, orange is Belgium. Y-axis is total volume being consumed of minced meat in both these countries. X-axis is the time. They look, again, meat consumption looks very similar in Germany compared to Belgium. So that gives us more confidence that it's a good control. So that's just meat consumption overall did not change as well. So people didn't look at the label and start consuming more meat or less meat. That's one empirical finding here. We then do a different diff. Again, this essentially the same reduced form chart, but now with more careful fixed effects in there. And we're also controlling for patterns in Belgium. So this has household fixed effects, year quarter fixed effects, and the main coefficient of interest is this beta label. And the I is the indicator for whether that household was in Germany or not. So if it's in Germany, it gets a 1. And if it's after April 2019, which is after the uniform label phase, Germany households get a 1 there. Otherwise, it's all 0, right? So that's kind of the typical two-way fixed effect estimator there. And let's take a look at results here for both. So for Y, we use both the share of level 4, also overall meat consumed. And we see something very similar compared to the reduced form I just showed you, where this beta label sees an increase by 2 percentage points, which essentially means that you were consuming. So level 4 in Germany was, I think the baseline is about 5%, 5% of minced meat, and that goes up by 2 percentage points. And so that's about a 40% increase in level 4 meat consumption in Germany relative to Belgium, relative to the before period. Total meat consumed does not have any significant change. So that's, we find this has an effect on level 4 shares overall. And yeah, so let me pause here to address any questions. Although it looked like, yes, go ahead.
Not sure if you mentioned this before, but are there any entry and exits during this phase? Do we have to see more supplies of, say, level 4, or is it given a product, there's just more demand on the existing SKUs?
Yeah, so it's more of the second, where it's given a product, it is more likely to get a higher, but you're right, this does not really have an SKU fixed effect in there. We look again at assortment, at the assortment changes over time. I don't have this graph here, but it's there in the paper. It looks very stable, assortment as a whole. So level 4, it's not that we see more level 4, and I think this was Anosha's question earlier too. We don't see more level 4 or more level 1 as a result of this, partly because we're looking at 9 months, which is a short-term period. We know from news that eventually that does happen, but in this period, no. So that's not what is happening.
I had sort of a related question of, is there, if you don't see unique SKUs increase, do more retailers now carry these unique SKUs? Right. So even if like before you didn't carry like a level 4 SKU, now, even though it existed before, now you just, offer it as an assortment in your store. So sort of combining the question of assortment changes and assortment differences across different stores, like maybe previously the retailer that didn't have a level 4 is now offering a level 4. You also mentioned that it's private label, so maybe that's not a problem because it would be unique, I guess, to the retailer, but I'd be curious to know, like, within retailer intensity of distribution, I guess.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the nice features of our data. So by definition, Aldi cannot take a little, minced meat and sell it. They wouldn't do that. So that's kind of the benefit of having private labels. With national brands, what you're saying would definitely be a possibility. So I don't think that is possible in our data, or it's happening. But yeah, it's and to some extent we can control for those assortment, right? So in our discrete choice model, we do look at the retail store you're shopping in that purchase and look at what assortment you are faced with and control for that. But yeah, that's a great point. Yes, follow.
Yeah, so
I
so my
want-
oh, sorry, go ahead. I'll ask
Oh
you.
yeah, that's okay. I was just wondering, where is this substitution coming from? Are people spending more on meat? Are they substituting away from other meat products? Or
Most of it is coming from level 1. So minced meat, I stopped buying the level 1 mint.
I mean in spending. So if level 4 is more expensive and I switch to substitute towards spending more on level 4, then the grocery bill goes up. Or do they stop spending in other meat categories?
So why? Oh, I see. So it's like a mental accounting question as to, where is that money coming from? I don't know whether we've looked at it. Yeah, so whether they're substituting from they're buying less of, if they're spending, and we'll talk about willingness to pay eventually, but they are willing to pay more for this. I don't know whether they're spending less on other vegetarian things or other meat products, but I think that's what we have, that category information, so we could technically look at the entire basket and see whether their entire basket is changing. Good, that's a good point, but we don't have answer to that yet. Follow?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what my question really is. So I think I'm not surprised by the result of the level 4 or organic, which are somewhat confounded,
Right.
going up in Germany. I'm somewhat, I think, puzzled by the fact that it didn't go up in Belgium. So in France, for example, Carrefour really opened up in the last few years a big area for organic, which means they did carry more, even if they didn't carry a bigger variety, they just give more space, more facings to the organic products. And so seeing that graph, I think that you had, it was very stable on Belgian. And so I was wondering, at least I would have expected a little bit of an increase there, which in the end would be, smaller difference. And so I'm trying to probably, so it did little, for example, change more in one country because they implemented that. So I'm trying to solve this puzzle of why not seeing an effect on the baseline country.
Because you think organic in general should see a trend up?
At least that's, yeah, I don't have data. So in nutrition, which is the data that I do have, nutrition labels did go up, but that's not entirely correlated with organic.
Yeah, so I think that's a fair question. I think that was our anticipation as well. Like we thought going into the data we would see kind of an organic trend overall. But yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of having a control to control for any such trends, but yeah, so when I don't know if I'll get to it, but when we look at heterogeneity among demographics, we do see the older population not responding to this. So it could be like there could be a ceiling effect, or it could be that they're already consuming organic and there is it's pretty much flat, but it's a younger population that is making this change. And it could be that they're looking at this and responding to these labels, either for whatever reason, right? So I think, yeah, but that's a fair. We also thought that there would be a trend upwards towards organic, but the data is the data, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
okay, cool. Let me quickly get into our research question 2, which is, we want to understand, and this is also ongoing work. So there's a lot of, I think, work to be done in this point here. But we want to see if a retail specific versus a uniform label, which is adopted uniformly by Germany overall, do they have differential effects? And we collected chain-specific label introduction dates from press releases. So when did Lidl do this? We know this. When did Aldi do this? But for this chart I'm going to show you next, we focus on Lidl because it was the first adopter. And also we focus on single store shoppers to avoid any kinds of spillovers that I shop at Lidl, I see a label, I shop at Aldi, I see a label. So to avoid any spillovers, we look only at those people who shop specifically at Lidl. And then our last adopter is a chain called Edeka that never did a store-specific label. It only went to the uniform label phase. So we can see differences, if any, between these two. And it gives us a clean identification of what happens when a store does this by themselves, as opposed to when you do it in, I don't want to say collusively, but collectively is what I'll call it. But that's kind of our estimation here. So what we find is essentially that when it's when it's one store doing it, there's not much of an effect. But when it's uniform, we do find an effect. So here is the table of results. So you'll see that the number of observations is much smaller because we're looking at only single store shoppers. And when it was Lidl only in what we call the transition phase, there is an increase, but it's not significant. But when it is the Lidl only shoppers, when it is a uniform label, we see a big bump in their level 4. So here, this is only the level 4 relative to any other minced meat. There's a big bump, which means that even these Lidl only shoppers, when there's a uniform label, they're responding to it more. Same with Edeka only. So this is a chain that never had a private label, but the uniform label makes a big impact. So one could think that maybe these things take time for people to internalize, but no, for Edeka only in the 9 months that we study, there is a big impact of the label. And part of this is, I think, going back to Andre's question earlier, it's about awareness. And I think Zhenling, you had brought this up with some of the questions from the chat as well. That's possible. And so this is the chart I was referring to, which has the Google's search volume index of each of these terms. The purple line is the uniform label. And you can see that after this April 2019, which is when it was introduced, there's a lot of chat or chatter about the uniform label. The Lidl label does get some traction. That's the orange line here, Lidl's retail specific label, but it's less than half of what the uniform label gets. So this is some evidence that awareness might play a role in making these kinds of labels informative. The other store labels don't get, so the green and blue don't have much traction, which is Aldi and Netto. But anyway, this is something, we're hoping to also get data on Aldi and Netto when they introduced things and see how consumers are responding to those labels. But punchline here is you need it to be pretty big change. It has to be adopted by everyone for it to make an impact. If it's only one retailer, the impact is not as much. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering if you have any information of, whether these retailers did any sort of, in-store features on their own of these products. I guess the way you set it up made it seem like, they might have incentive to make this successful, like because they don't want that, government mandated label or whatever. And so if so, then maybe they have incentive to promote it themselves, not just the political discussion, but also some other, in-store features or whatever it might be, even if it's not price promotions, some other.
So do you think that might be more so for uniform as opposed to the retail specific, or you think both?
I don't know, I guess. I don't have like a prior. I can imagine that if you sort of agree among all the retailers, you know, you're now in it together. Yeah. So I don't know, maybe something like that, but I'm not sure. I guess it's more of a question to the entire effect as well, right? Is a part of it also something that's driven by the retailers promoting it in some way? If it's not price promotion, some other way.
Yeah, so absolutely, right? So that's something which we don't observe, and I think it is part of the effect. Only thing I would say is, you know, if it's, like I said, like if the retailer, when they have their own label, they would probably also have incentives to popularize this. We don't see an effect there. So that's the only thing I would say. But otherwise, you know, if during the uniform label, if they're doing it more so, then that is going to be netted into this. I don't think we have data on whether they're doing this. We could, I guess, figure out this from any news articles or mentions about whether this is happening. But yeah, that's
in the Nielsen data, I might look to like the feature column, but I don't know if it exists in this data.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, fair. Okay, so the last portion in, I think, the last 3 minutes that I have, we do something very similar, focusing only on Germany, but to essentially get at the willingness to pay. So what is this 2 percentage points? I think partly Olivia's question also about, you know, how much in terms of money that you're parting, what is this translating to? And also understand whether some groups are investing or, you know, being influenced more so than others. And this controls for a bunch of confounding factors, including assortment set and prices, which could change or not change. And I'll just, so the equation we estimate at the household level is for each individual, we assign a utility, which is a function of different meat types, different pack sizes, whether it's level 4 or not. And then of interest here is what happens to whether it's level 4 after the uniform label. And we control for month or seasonality effects. And there's a C here in case price is endogenous, which we use a cost shifter, which is the cost of barley, which is used to feed animals as a cost shifter. And turns out it's a great cost shifter. So I think we're not so concerned about price endogeneity there. I'll show you the results, which essentially I'll show you beta divided by alpha for each household across households to see what the average willingness to pay changes. And this is the willingness to pay graph. What we see is a mean increase in willingness to pay of about 0.3 euros, which is about a 13% increase, given that level 4 products are on average about 2.5 euros costlier than level 1 products. So it's people are paying more for these level 4 labeled products on average. Then we want to see what kind of consumer is doing this. And I kind of alluded to this in a bit. So we don't see changes by income. We don't see changes by household size, but we do see changes by how old you are. And I'll just show this to you in a graph so it's easier. What we see, and ignore, so this is bumped up by 0.308, which is the intercept. Essentially, the millennials are the ones that are responding the most. These are the youngest in our sample. The silent generation, who is the oldest, essentially has 0 effect. And we think that it's possible that younger people are more responsive. They are the ones, vocally talking about animal welfare. It could also be a ceiling effect. We can't disentangle this with the data we have, but we do know that the silent generation actually, it's already at buying about 5% of their organic purchases. So there might not be room to buy more of this. So they might already be at a high, if you will. So that could be 2 reasons why we are seeing this generational difference. But I think this is fairly relevant for policymakers or anyone thinking about who should we target to address these kinds of issues, who should actually be impacted. Paulo, will you bear with me till I conclude, and then I'll get back to you. So yeah, so essentially, just want to conclude before time's up. We do see that the label has an impact on the choice of meat. There is an increase in willingness to pay for this higher animal welfare labeled meat, but it doesn't change the overall quantity. There is suggestive evidence that a uniform label is needed. A store-specific label is not sufficient. Could be other reasons for that. And finally, younger consumers are most responsive to this change. And I think these answers to our questions could potentially inform other countries. I think, I don't know if Paulo, you're familiar with this, but I think France is also considering like animal welfare labeling from A to E, and they are thinking of doing something like this. So potentially this could help, these answers to these questions can help them understand what they should be doing. Also, US is also kind of struggling right now with unsubstantiated claims, a lot of consumer demand for these label claims, but the USDA itself is overwhelmed. It gets about 120 label applications per week for things like thoughtfully raised. And so they just say, okay, so all these claims are okay. So hopefully a third party certification along these lines will be helpful. And, our research hopefully sheds light to some of these other countries thinking about these effects. So that's all I had. Thank you all for all the questions, and I'll let Paulo ask his question now.